Hello, everyone. Welcome to the last episode of Season 1.
Yes, this is so exciting. You know, I had been bugging Steve to do a podcast, and I don't know, the timing just was right, and we started it, and we did it, and I'm proud of us. I am. I have a little pride.
I'm okay with us. Yeah, I guess I agree.
Anyway, we thought we would take a little break for the holidays coming up, for us, for you, because, you know, it's good to spend time with the fam bam.
Sure. It's also just good time to talk to all of your relatives about these wonderful, deep, easy issues.
Yeah, super easy. Good luck with that.
So we know Thanksgiving's coming up on Thursday. We wanted to, first of all, say thanks to our listeners and then share a couple things we're thankful for before we get into today's episode.
I am thankful for podcasts.
Surprise!
Oh my gosh, Steve. Because when I hand wash the dishes, because we don't have a dishwasher, the horror, I listen to podcasts, and it actually turns washing dishes into a pretty enjoyable task.
She did tell me, don't use it against me, Steve, but I like washing dishes now.
What?
You definitely told me that like months ago.
I don't recall that particular quote, but maybe I don't have the best memory. Another thing that I'm thankful for is cheese. Let me explain that. Every now and then, I like to make a nice homemade pan of mac and cheese. And here in Quito, it's been a little difficult to find a cheese that works well when I'm making the roux/bechamel sauce. The cheese kind of breaks down and seems like it coagulates a little bit. It's not a pretty picture. So when I saw this article in the New York Times talking about how to make the best mac and cheese, I definitely clicked on it and read it. Clickbait. And you know what they told me? This baffled me. They said that the chemical that is used in processed cheese, you know, that awful American cheese, the individual slices, or the Velveeta.
Hey, there's a little bit of tone in your voice that seems like those cheeses aren't good enough, like you're a cheese snob.
I am a cheese snob. That I can't say that I'm not.
Yes, but these cheeses have value.
I am sorry if I'm offending anyone by my tone of voice when I'm talking about American cheese. Oh my gosh, side story, really, really quick. One year, the first day of school, I asked my students, as just like a little warm-up, get to know you. Steve had asked this question before, and I liked it. I was like, all right, we're just going to go around for attendance question today. What's your favorite kind of cheese? And I am not going to name names, but I do remember exactly who this was. One of my students answered American cheese was their favorite cheese. Out of all the cheeses, American cheese was their favorite cheese. And I am not going to lie to you, as an adult teacher who is supposed to be, you know, above reproach, I think I actually laughed a little bit at her. I was baffled. I couldn't believe, out of all the cheeses, American cheese is your favorite? So if that particular student happens to be listening, I apologize. That was mean of me. I shouldn't have done that. But anyway, back to what I'm thankful for. Reading this article, it said that when you make your bechamel sauce, if you add a little bit of this processed cheese, the chemical used in this processed cheese does some kind of magical chemical reaction in your bechamel sauce so that your cheese sauce doesn't coagulate or separate. And the chemical, if you spell it out using the abbreviations from the periodic table, it spells out nacho, which is kind of cool.
Okay. Anyway, that leaves it to me to be thankful for something. Oh, and that makes me have to think a little bit. But mainly I'm thankful that Jen does almost all the work for this podcast, and then I just have to sit here and talk with her.
And make fun of me. I would add that to another thing that you have to do, because that's one of the things that you enjoy doing when I try to be organized and write scripts and templates and whatnot.
Not false.
All right, let's get into it.
You may have been wondering this whole time, what is the meaning behind the name Red Weather Christians?
Well, the wait is over, because that is what we're going to talk about in this episode. It is the big reveal. Red Weather Christians.
I'm Steve.
And I'm Jen. We're here uncovering doubts, wading through disillusionment, and teasing through our own faith one episode at a time. Thanks for pressing play today.
So the name Red Weather Christians is something, I think I came up with it, right?
Of course you did, jerk.
Anyway, she liked it enough that we went with it.
As soon as he said it, I was like, yes, that's it. That's the one.
And we both knew where it came from, at least in our background. But my mom had actually suggested maybe an even better reason for why the name is what it is.
Well, she was trying to guess why we named ourselves that. And she was like, oh, I know. It's from the verse in Matthew 16, 2-3. And the verse says, he answered them, when it is evening, you say it will be fair weather, for the sky is red. And in the morning, it will be stormy today, for the sky is red and threatening.
Yeah, so you might know that more as the old sailor adage, red sky at night, sailor delight, red sky in the morning, sailor take warning. And that's great, because she thought it was whether the weather is good or bad. No matter if the red weather is at night or in the morning, we're still Christian.
Which I actually really love.
Because I think that's what we're talking about through this whole time.
Yeah. It hits the nail on the head for sure.
However, that is not where we got it.
No. And let me just set up our story a little bit with taking you guys back a few years. I was still teaching English. We were living in Florida. Steve and I were out on a walk with the kids and the dogs.
Definitely didn't have kids.
Oh, we didn't?
Nope.
Oh, oops. Was there a life before kids? I don't seem to remember what that's like.
We definitely were on a walk, at least for part of it, with the dog, but it came home with us as well.
Okay.
Not just the dog.
Yeah. So I was teaching 2 poems the next day in class, and I wanted to just talk about them with Steve. Now, if you're an avid listener, you might remember us referencing this story in an earlier episode. Well, now you'll get the specifics of it. So the 2 poems were Fire and Ice by Robert Frost and a poem called Disillusionment of 10 O'Clock by Wallace Stevens. So I had made Steve read both of these poems, and then we went for our walk. And we argued about the meaning of these 2 poems the entire walk, then when we got home, up until bed, and we did not get closure. And we went to sleep.
This is one of those things where, yes, I could have just fallen asleep. I don't know. It didn't matter. Closure was not important.
You probably just fell asleep. And then in the morning, it was still like no closure. I went to class that day. I told my students, my husband and I were arguing because they all knew him too, because he was teaching at the school as well. And when you read the poems, you're going to be like, why were you guys arguing so much about these? But that just gives you a little glimpse into our lives. Now, it's not like that so much anymore with kids because, dang, they take up a lot of our energy.
Well, and just audio space. We were trying to sing earlier tonight, and Shade is just screaming.
Well, and Memphis, too. And Asher was, too. Oh, it was a mess. We were, like, trying to have a musical moment together, and Steve was playing the piano and singing, and I was singing and harmonizing, and it was garbage because of our kids.
All of it was yuck.
Yep, definitely. So, okay, poems. You guys are like, oh my gosh, the big reveal is a poem? But hear us out. We're going to start by reading the poem to you, right? Don't you think?
I mean, we can. If this reminds some of our listeners of Jen's actual classroom.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I was going to say I'm sorry, but.
Okay, well, then I'll just go into English teacher mode and tell you that the first step in poetry analysis is to look at the title. So if you just think of the title, Disillusionment of 10 O'Clock, what do you think of? You have the word disillusionment, which we've talked a lot about in this podcast. Did we ever talk about really what that word meant?
I don't know. You could tell them the denotation and the connotation of it.
Oh my gosh, shut up. So disillusionment is kind of a buzzword, I feel like. A lot of people are using it. They're like, oh, I'm so disillusioned. But do you really know what it means? It's when you realize the truth about a situation and it's not great. And you kind of feel like the scales have fallen off your eyes and you're like, oh my gosh, I see things the way they really are. And it's not what I was hoping it would be. It's not what I thought it was. It's that kind of feeling. It's that kind of idea.
Like when you finally become an adult and you think you can make all your own choices and play video games all day, and then you actually have like obligations to, I don't know, make money or pay bills or something.
Oh, yeah, because Asher all the time is like, oh, I can't wait until I'm a grown-up and I can just do whatever I want. It's like, okay, buddy, just wait.
Right.
So then we have this disillusionment, and it is of 10 o'clock. What are we talking here? 10 o'clock at night, 10 o'clock in the morning? We don't know, but it seems like it's at a specific point. And it's not disillusionment at 10 o'clock, it's disillusionment of 10 o'clock. So there's a slight difference there. Okay, you want to read it? Do you want me to?
I might not do it justice. The houses are haunted by white nightgowns. None are green, or purple with green rings, or green with yellow rings, or yellow with blue rings. None of them are strange, with socks of lace and beaded censures. People are not going to dream of baboons and periwinkles. Only, here and there, an old sailor, drunken asleep in his boots, catches tigers in red weather.
That was very good, Stephen.
Thanks for mouthing it along with me.
I didn't know I was doing that. Was I doing that? I was just trying to, like, send you good vibes. Like, do a good job. Okay, so if you think about this poem, feel free to press pause and look it up so you have the text right in front of you. That's what I would suggest.
Where should they go to find it, Jen?
I like poetryfoundation.org personally. So the houses are haunted by white nightgowns. These white nightgowns are haunting the houses. They are white, and it goes on to say what they aren't. They're not green. They're not purple with green rings. They're not green with yellow rings. They're not yellow with blue rings. They're not strange. They don't have socks of lace. They don't have beaded censures. And then it says people are not going to dream of baboons and periwinkles. And then there's a huge shift in the poem. But we'll wait for a moment and we'll talk about these nightgowns.
They're white, they're plain, and they're haunting houses.
Seems like a negative thing, right? If they're haunting houses. So I think about this being maybe 10 o'clock at night, and you can see, like, if you look up into the windows of houses, you can see these white nightgowns kind of floating past. It's actually, in my mind, I don't think it's just literally nightgowns. I think it's referring to people, the people in the nightgowns, but that they're all the same. They're all doing the same thing. They're all wearing the same thing. It's white. It's devoid of color. They're just status quo.
Well, to be clear, white actually is all colors when it deals with light. So
Eye roll. I mean, thank you, Steve, for that good and valid point. That's what I say to students. Eye roll. No, I would never do that. I would just laugh at you if you say American cheese is your favorite kind of cheese.
Right. So that's all well and good if you think this is 10 o'clock at night and people are in these nightgowns because they're going to sleep in their nightgowns. Of course, there is still the rest of the poem, which is where I get a different interpretation of this, and then we, Jen and I, disagree.
So then the rest of the poem is about the old, drunk, sleeping sailor who is so drunk that he falls asleep in his boots. He's the one catching tigers in red weather, which I think means he's dreaming, because it had just been talking about how the night-gowned people aren't dreaming of baboons and periwinkles. Like, I think it's talking about how they're not dreaming of anything interesting at all.
Because their lives aren't interesting.
Right. But the sailor who might, go out on adventures and travel and see different parts of the world, and he's dreaming of things. Interesting things, catching tigers in red weather.
And don't let it slip too far past you that this is a sailor and red weather and the old adage that we've already mentioned. That this red weather could be good or bad.
Right. I just see a huge contrast between white and red. And white as being very plain and boring, and red being very vibrant.
But if we have this drunk sailor and we think about the time of day that he might be still asleep with his boots on. To me, that seems like he was up late, maybe till past closing time drinking, and now he's still drunk and asleep the next morning at 10 o'clock in the morning. That puts those white nightgowns haunting houses, maybe hanging up in closets.
Yeah, and this was our argument. I could not understand how he possibly could think that 10 o'clock was talking about 10 o'clock in the morning. And again, this is just a little peek into the things that we argue about, because we argued so hard about this. Because I was saying it's 10 o'clock at night. It says people are not going to dream of baboons and periwinkles. Like, it hasn't happened yet. So they're like just getting to bed. They're gonna go to sleep. They're up, walking around in their nightgowns, getting ready for bed. And we already know, because of the types of people these are, that they're not even gonna dream.
Yes, but you know who else isn't going to dream? People who are wide awake in the middle of the day at 10 o'clock.
Okay, that is a valid point, actually. And I actually like it because it does reinforce the idea of these people in white nightgowns, whether the white nightgowns are hung up or on the clothesline or they're on bodies and they're walking around their house at 10 p.m. It shows that these people don't have a lot going on inside their brains. And when Steve and I, aside from the argument of 10 o'clock at night or 10 o'clock in the morning, Steve and I both really resonated with the idea of we don't want to be like those people. We don't want to be like the white nightgowned people.
Even though in some ways we probably are kind of plain and boring. And I have to admit that sometimes about myself.
Yeah. And I think plain and boring is definitely a part of this poem, but also it's talking about status quo, of just doing all the things that are expected of you, doing the things that everyone else is doing.
And yet, maybe the hero of this story is this drunk old sailor who...
Maybe we should start drinking, Steve.
Which is not someone I would want to emulate.
No, but if you take a step back and look at it maybe more as an extended metaphor or an analogy of two types of people, you have the people who are just wearing the nightgowns. They're going to sleep every night at 10 o'clock or whatever they're doing at 10 a.m. But it's just like kind of this monotony and following the status quo of what's expected of them. Whereas the sailor is like, who knows what he's going to do? But he's dreaming of catching tigers in red weather, and that sounds pretty interesting.
Right. There's also another way to think about this 10 o'clock, because I still want to reinforce my 10 a.m. idea here. And that is, if I let Jen have that the nightgowns are being worn by these people, she wants to insist that it's 10 p.m. I would say they can still be wearing them at 10 a.m. But who are the types of people to still be in their nightgowns at 10 a.m.? Is that a really exciting thing? Is that living life to the fullest?
I mean, yeah, that's true. But if we're going with the status quo thing, I think people would be getting up in the morning and going to their status quo jobs.
But if you apply it to today's world and you think, what's your house doing at 10 a.m.? People are usually all gone. And what is it haunted by? Some bland white nightgown with no color or frills?
So then if you go back to the title, which is what I would always tell my students to do after you read the poem and talk about it, disillusionment of 10 o'clock, what does that mean? Because it's not disillusionment of the white nightgowns. It's disillusionment of 10 o'clock, of that time. And it is interesting to note that there is ambiguity. It doesn't say if it's at night or in the morning, hence why we argued for hours about this.
Past 10 o'clock.
Definitely past 10 o'clock. But there's ambiguity, and 10 o'clock is recurring. So you have, unless you're doing military time, but you have 10 o'clock twice a day, essentially, right? 10 o'clock in the morning, 10 o'clock at night, 10 o'clock the next morning, 10 o'clock the next night, and on and on and on.
And if 10 o'clock becomes what Jen defined for us as disillusionment, something that is much different than what you expected. What did you expect? And now what do you get out of it?
And to me, it's just like, it seems like it's talking about life, because time, it just keeps on ticking and we keep on living until we die. But every day we are going to experience 10 o'clock twice. And if there's a disillusionment of that, oh my gosh, that's depressing.
So, to bring it back to why we are red weather Christians, that last little snippet of this poem stuck with us. The catching tigers in red weather.
We want to be different, and that includes our Christianity. We don't want to float along with the Christian status quo. And I think about nightgowns and haunting, and it makes me think of ghosts. And ghosts just float around. They're kind of restless. They're just kind of there.
If they exist at all.
Yeah. But in your mind, what do you think of when you think of ghosts? But we don't want to be like that.
And let's not set aside the idea that 10 o'clock is probably a time on a Sunday when you might be in church, which just adds another layer for us, disillusionment of 10 o'clock.
This is what's so great about poetry, is because you read it and you bring into the poem all of your life experiences. So our life experience has been going to church every single Sunday. And where are you at 10 o'clock every single Sunday? You're at church. That was our experience growing up.
And that probably brings us to another poem that Jen would like to share.
Well, before I do, I just wanted to make one more comment that I just think is interesting because of social media. It says the houses are haunted by white nightgowns. And I think about like Instagram feeds or whatever, and what's popular and what influencers are doing and what's like getting all the likes and the engagement and all of that. And a lot of it is when you think of like home decor houses, it's white walls. There's so much white. White is really popular right now. And I just love it because it plays right into this poem. And you go onto Instagram or whatever social media you use, and you just see kind of a lot of the same, and you just eat it up. You love it. You're like, I want my house to look like that or whatever. But then you take a step back. You're like, well, I don't really want to be like everybody else. And I don't know if you remember this, Steve, or if you had this experience, but when I was growing up, my parents always told me, like, you don't need to be like everybody else. Don't be like everybody else. You're going to become a teenager and you're going to just want to be like everybody else. I'm like, no, I'm not. When I'm a teenager, I'm not going to be like that. And then I became a teenager and I was like that.
I don't know. I don't think that was me.
So I just wanted to add that little element about social media with the white. It's like, maybe let's not just be our white-walled houses and white bed sheets and white comforters and white.
Let's have green and purple with green rings.
And all the things. Okay, so yeah, the other poem that Steve said that I wanted to share, it's called Introduction to Poetry by Billy Collins. And this makes me think of how people approach the Bible. And the poem goes a little like this. I ask them to take a poem and hold it up to the light, like a color slide, or press an ear against its hive. I say, drop a mouse into a poem and watch him probe his way out, or walk inside the poem's room and feel the walls for a light switch. I want them to water ski across the surface of a poem, waving at the author's name on the shore. But all they want to do is tie the poem to a chair with rope and torture a confession out of it. They begin beating it with a hose to find out what it really means.
So when we were talking about how to put this episode together, we realized both of our perspectives on disillusionment of 10 o'clock seem reasonable, and that there's a discussion to be had, and that we might come back in 5 or 10 or 20 years to read the poem and still think of something new or different, and that the discussion doesn't have to end. That we don't have to figure out what it actually means. We can't go back and ask Wallace Stevens what it actually means, and we don't need to.
Yeah, and that's what made me think of this Billy Collins poem. And the part where it says, but all they want to do is tie the poem to a chair with rope and torture confession out of it. They begin beating it with a hose to find out what it really means. I think Steve and I, we were never getting actually angry that night when we were on the walk talking about these poems, but we were going at it. We both felt very convicted in our opinion and our interpretation of the poem, and we were not backing down. And it was an interesting and, dare I say, enjoyable argument. It was.
Sure. that's mainly because it didn't matter who was right or if there was a right. I think that's what's enjoyable, that we could just talk.
And so, but when you take it to the Bible, people have listening to our podcast, they've told us. I've lost a friend over this, I feel like. They've told us this is not the correct way of interpreting the Bible. And that's it. That's the end of the sentence. And Steve and I just don't agree with that. We think that there is discussion to be had, and that depending on the person and depending on how you grew up, where you grew up, you're going to bring all of your life experiences into reading any text. Poetry, the Bible.
The Bible, because it's made up of a lot of poetry.
Let's not forget that. A lot of the Bible is poetry, figurative language, analogies, allegories. And so I guess we would say that those Christians out there who say, listen, this is the definitive interpretation. This is what is the truth. There is no room for discussion. I guess we would say those are like the white nightgowned Christians.
They're haunting the churches instead of the houses.
Yeah, and they're like ghosts. They're not really alive. And while the sailor might be drunk, he is a real person.
It is still up to interpretation what he is drunk on. Maybe happiness.
Maybe life.
Sure, all of the good things you could be drunk on instead of alcohol.
There we go.
But yes, if you focus again on the end of that Billy Collins poem and you're talking about torturing a confession out of the Bible, yeah, sometimes even within evangelism, we want to torture a confession out of the person we're talking to so that they profess Christ as their savior. That doesn't seem right either. I think there should just be an ongoing conversation. And if they decide that they're going to profess Jesus as Savior, that's fine. But beating it over people's heads or trying to get all of the truth from the Bible, you're going to be left with a lot more questions than you started with.
And I just feel like a little bit raw about this, a little vulnerable, that this friend that I had who was a good friend, I feel like they canceled me because of what we said in episode 4 about God changing. And then it was just done. Conversation over. Friendship over. And it hurt my feelings.
So hopefully through this discussion of poetry, you know why we named ourselves Red Weather Christians and where it came from. That is disillusionment of 10 o'clock. And it's that last line where we hope to be different and we hope to have questions. We hope not to just be a boring white nightgown. And thanks to my mom, we do hope to stay Christian through the good and the bad weather that we may experience.
Thanks again for listening today. Thanks again for just being with us this whole time. We really appreciate you. This is our last episode of season 1. If you're looking for things to do in the interim between seasons, you can, here comes a shameless plug. You can check out my blog, lifeloveandsentences.wordpress.com. You might appreciate my post called Episode 4. It is a poem that I wrote about the reaction one of my maybe former friends had about Episode 4. And if you know me, you might know that I do not publish my poetry. If you are listening and you are one of my former students, you've probably heard some of my poetry because that's the only place I share it is in the classroom. I don't publish it because it's terrifying to me. But if you'd like to check it out, go ahead and head over to my blog.
I don't have a blog.
Cool, Steve.
You're welcome. But we are going to be reading some books this holiday break. And if you'd like to read along with us, here are the titles. Take it away, Jen.
I am super excited. My friend went to the States a couple weeks ago and she's like, oh, do you want me to bring you anything? I'm like, yes, books, always books, never not books. So I quickly hopped on and ordered a couple of books. And one of them was Jesus and John Wayne. Super excited about this one. And the other one is God and the Gay Christian. Also super excited about this one. Those are what are on my to-read list.
And I'm also going to read The Making of Biblical Womanhood because I think it's important and I want to know more about it.
It is an awesome book, and he's going to get to see all my underlinings and annotations and comments in the margins as he goes.
I'm also thinking I should read the other 2 books before she does so that I can read them unblemished.
Oh my gosh, you're so mean. Annotations and underlining. There is a great quote. It was always up in my classroom, and it said, "To read without reflecting is like eating without digesting." And so that's what I feel like when I read a book and I reflect. The reflection is my annotations and my underlining and my comments in the margins.
Yes, but those are someone else's reflections. I don't totally disagree that you should do that, but I don't necessarily want to read the book for the first time with someone else's underlining and reflections.
You know, I'm only his wife. You'd think maybe he would love me or something like that, care about my comments. Anyway.
If you're enjoying Red Weather Christians.
No, stop. Gosh. I'm going to read that later.
Line.
Can you just
say something? We are Red Weather Christians.
I'm Jen.
And I'm Steve. Leave no doubt unturned.
Until next season. Hey, everybody. If you're enjoying Red Weather Christians, would you share with friends and on social media? That'd be pretty awesome. You can tag me if you want. I am JNAP_JK on both Instagram and Twitter. And we would be Thanksgiving thankful if you would do that.
What does that mean?
All right, everybody, we're out.
This.